David Lombardi. How are you, man? Good
What's
to see you.
going on, man? Yeah,
great.
I was just talking you up, so I really appreciate the nice words. I was finishing up my show, and I was like, everybody better change the channel over now to John's show. So hopefully there's a nice bump. Hopefully we brought some people over, and it's really cool to see you here on YouTube, because you've always been one of my favorite guys to listen to for a long, long time in the Bay Area. So I'm actually really, really excited. I'm kind of geeking out at the opportunity to do something with you.
Oh, I feel the same way. I really do. And let me just again pop it up there and cover our faces for a minute. Cover mine more than yours, but your page is awesome. I was watching you last night. I was texting with you, and then I was watching you, and you do a tremendous job. Your mind works so well. Your numbers are so great. Whether it's with the Athletic or what you're doing now with the SF Standard, and just doing the tremendous job you're doing. So I got a lot of respect for you for a long time. And I think people don't understand. Before we get into the 49ers. If I'm not wrong, I know you went to Stanford. I think when I was at 95.7 the game, this clicked into my mind one time. You were with us just for like a brief time, right? Didn't you? Weren't you at 95.7 for a minute?
Yeah, I did the updates like every 30 minutes or whatever.
Yeah,
I think that's when we first met back in the day.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So anyway, we've known each other for a long time. A ton of respect. You do something that nobody else does with the 49ers. And it's no surprise that you're as successful as you are on YouTube. So everybody make sure you follow David. You probably already do. He's tremendous at what he does. So let's just jump into this whole thing. So we were looking at, obviously, the situation with Robert Saleh. He's clearly the number one choice to come back to the 49ers. And I have some of the numbers that you popped up as well, some of those great charts that the guys at SF Data Niners do. So we'll pop those up in just a second and look at special teams. But just from your standpoint, all of a sudden, he's supposed to go to Jacksonville. He's supposed to talk to the Jags. But all of a sudden, Liam Coen does an about face, says his kid is sick. Actually, he's in Jacksonville. Dude, talk about burning a bridge. That better work, because that's not good. But anyway, he's going to go to Jacksonville. The Raiders are going with Pete Carroll. I don't think Robert Saleh is going to the Cowboys or the Saints. So as it's been reported, if Robert Saleh is going to be a DC, and I thought maybe the Lions would make sense, but that's not going to happen. So he's going to reunite with Kyle. So give us your thoughts on Robert Saleh coming back, and how big of a deal is that to you?
Well, first it has to become official, and I'm always wary of this stuff. I mean, I've done all these shows here the last couple of days, and I keep on trying to couch it, saying, "Hey guys, we just saw what happened with Liam Coen. Crazy stuff is happening in this league with these coordinator and these coaching jobs." So they got to get it signed, sealed, and delivered. Maybe that happens today. Maybe it takes a little bit longer, but it's on the right track. That's for sure. You can kind of just run process of elimination. And we know that Saleh has told the 49ers that if he's a coordinator this year, he's going to be a coordinator with them. And he's interviewed for 3 head coaching positions. 2 of those are now filled, right? Jacksonville with Liam Coen, and the Raiders with Pete Carroll, which is another crazy twist of this morning. And it doesn't look like he's a serious candidate for the Cowboys job, which is the 3rd job that he's interviewed for. I don't know what the Saints are doing, so that they're kind of off on an island by themselves. But anyway, if Saleh comes back, this is the big fish hire for the 49ers if they're able to get this done, because they're looking for 3 things. They were looking for experience, and Robert Saleh obviously brings that. He's now been a head coach in this league, so he's even more experienced than he was the first time with the 49ers. They're looking for somebody who's familiar with what they do schematically, because they don't want to change all too much, but they want to combine that with the experience to give themselves some adaptability. And the 3rd thing is energy. And all I can think of when Robert Saleh's name pops in my head is week 6 in 2019 against the Rams down at the Coliseum, when they had the goal line stop and then Jimmy Ward was breaking up passes to Cooper Kupp. That was the moment the 49ers defense, as we know it in this modern era, was christened. And that was Robert Saleh became the face of that. He became the star, flexing, fired up on the sideline. And I think that Kyle Shanahan realized that with Wilkes and with Sorensen the last couple of years, the energy level wasn't quite there from the defensive coordinator position, the way that he wanted it to be for the defense. So Saleh checks the energy box, he checks the experience box, and he checks the familiarity box. And those are the 3 things that the 49ers have really needed. And that's why they consider him to be the perfect candidate.
The great David Lombardi is joining us. Make sure you're on his YouTube channel and you're following on social media at Lombardi himself. There's not anybody better when it comes to the 49ers, especially when it comes down to the numbers. Let me pop this up because I know you're using these as well. The guys at SF Data Niners do a really nice job.
They're awesome. I love those guys.
So
I don't know who it is, but he doesn't.
Not me either, but I'm just like, I steal their stuff all the time. I try to give them credit. But as we can see right there, with the Jets, he was good. With the Niners, 17 and 18, a little bit more of the struggles. 19, they go to the Super Bowl, and he's so great. So I think the thing that I was kind of looking at when it came to Robert Saleh is no coach can overcome no talent. But I think the big thing with Saleh is whatever talent they do have, he's going to maximize said talent. So do they still need to get some interior defensive linemen? Sure. Do they got to figure out Dre Greenlaw? Sure. Do they have a young secondary? Yeah. But what he's going to do is maximize what the 49ers do. So let me pop this up, and I think you can see this. So do you, when you see like this kind of a chart there with Saleh, obviously bad bottom, better top, 17 and 18, they didn't have the great talent. But as you can see, even with the Jets, Saleh in 22 and 23, they had great defenses. And even the first 5 games of 24, they were really, really good. So clearly, Robert Saleh can coach.
Yeah, and it's funny. It followed a similar trajectory with the Jets as it did with the 49ers. That 21 season, they were the worst defense in football. That was his first year. And he just inherited a bare cupboard. Plus, he stripped it down to start rebuilding his own team. But it was very quick, the resurrection there from 21 to 22. So you're going bottom left to middle top. That was just in 1 year of work that he turned that defense into a plus pass defense. And then by 2023, it was plus in all categories. That was the number 3 defense in all football. So that was his third year with the Jets, 23, and 2019 was his third year with the 49ers. So you could see that there's a parallel in the rise of both of those defenses. However, I would say for the sake of the moment, and just in retrospect in general, I would say that 2020 job that Robert Saleh delivered might be his finest work, because it's all delivered within context, right? And 2020, the 49ers were so depleted by injuries.
Right.
And look what happened in 2024. They were depleted by injuries. I don't think it was as bad as it was in 2020, but the defense fell off a cliff this past year. And that's why they got rid of Sorensen, because the defense fell down to number 26. The run defense was number 29. And they just couldn't adapt when they needed to adapt, when the talent wasn't there. Saleh in 2020, without Bosa for almost all the year, with so many other guys hurt, Kerry Hyder was his best pass rusher.
Oh, man, look at you pulling that out. Yeah, nice.
So Saleh in 2020, that was the number 8 defense by EPA that year. And that directly preceded him getting the head coaching opportunity. So I think football people, everybody recognizes that 2019 was knocking on the door of historical greatness. It was an awesome defense, but what can you do as a coordinator when things aren't perfectly lined up for you? That's the big test, and Saleh passed it with flying colors in 2020. And I think that's, it's not as sexy to talk about, but I think that's even more important for the 49ers if they do end up finalizing this moving forward.
That was that's a great point about 2020, because we know after 19, then you had the injuries to Nick Bosa and Solomon Thomas in New York and everything kind of like this year. Let me pop this up too, because I know you're familiar with this one, but this is another great one. So this goes back, it even throws in Fangio, throws in DeMeco Ryans, and then you can see where 2024 was on that chart, even Steve Wilkes in 23. So they go to the Super Bowl in 23, they go to the Super Bowl in 19. But then you look at those Harbaugh years. Now 14 with Fangio obviously is more towards the Mendoza line there in the middle, because that was Harbaugh's last year in which they went 8-8. But then 11, 12, and 13 when they were in the mix NFC Championship games and Super Bowls, they're right there as well. So I love this chart that the guys put together, because you can tell from Fangio's time to Saleh's time to Wilkes' time to Sorensen's time, you got everybody in there through the couple of eras there from Harbaugh to Shanahan.
Yeah, and the outliers are the past 2 years. Every other year, except for the past 2, the 49ers have stopped the run at an above average level. You could see why Wilkes got fired after a year and why Sorensen didn't technically get fired. He got pulled out of the defensive coordinator spot. They wanted to keep him on the staff, but it doesn't seem that Sorensen wants to. That's the latest report. Doesn't look like he's going to be back. But anyway, they've replaced both of the guys from the past 2 years. And I think the root of the reason why is because the run defense has fallen off a cliff. Even personnel deficient 49ers defenses, and I'm talking specifically about 2017, 2018, and to a certain extent 2020 because of all the injuries, even personnel deficient 49ers defenses had been able to stay above average in run defense. Mm-hmm. And the fact that the bottom fell out in run defense led to so many issues over the past 2 years, because the problem, John, is that you just lose control over the game if you can't stop the run. Like 2021 is a really good example of the opposite happening. The 49ers really struggled in pass defense in 2021. Where's 2021 on there? You could see it's in the bottom half.
Yeah,
on the
bottom
bottom
to the
right.
right.
Yeah.
Yep.
So that pass defense was worse than this 2024 pass defense. It was almost at the level of 2017, which obviously wasn't a good year. But the 49ers still made the NFC Championship game, and they're still a dropped interception away from making the Super Bowl, maybe winning the Super Bowl. They had already beaten the Bengals that year. And the reason they were able to overcome the number 23 ranked pass defense was because their run defense was number 2 in the league. So they at least had some rigidity up front that allowed them to not just get blown out of the building. If you can't stop the run, the whole thing craters, right? And that gave them some chance at controlling game flow to a certain extent that allowed the offense, which was good in 21, to do its thing. But you can't operate with a bad run defense, and Shanahan has realized that, and he's swung and missed at 2 straight coordinators in that regard. So they need Saleh to get them back on the right side of this graph.
All right, it is David Lombardi. Let me just throw one more because this is you last night. I stole this straight from your.
And there's a typo there. Sorry, 2022 was number 1 defense on the right. It says number 14. So just to preface that, there's a typo.
Yeah. No, that's all right. I was watching you last night. I stole this, and I wanted to make sure that I gave you credit there. But great stuff, giving us the insight on that one as well. So let me ask you this, and let me just throw the charts off for just a second and ask you this question: which is, so what does Robert Saleh solve, and what does Robert Saleh not solve? So yeah, it's better. I mean, Nick Sorensen's a young guy. I was surprised that they did what they did because you're in a Super Bowl window. I know that the injuries happened last year, but Nick Sorensen was in over his head, and all the other coordinators, maybe, who would have known where they would have gone after that? Pete Carroll's going to end up in Vegas. That wouldn't have been the case. I know that a lot of people, we heard some rumblings about who would have been backup plans, and people didn't like that. But so Saleh comes in. What does he solve? What does he not solve?
Well, it's going to depend, again, on the personnel that the 49ers bring in to see what kind of ceiling they have. But I think as far as the floor goes, one thing I noticed about him in New York, and we didn't get to see all too much of this in San Francisco, but we saw a little bit of it in 2020, is that he was willing to up the blitz rates when the defense wasn't quite as good on the personnel side. Mm-hmm. In 2022 and 2023, when he had his 2 best defenses in New York, the Jets had the lowest blitz rate in the entire league because they didn't need a blitz. And Saleh, back with the 49ers, felt that he didn't need a blitz, and the proof is in the pudding. He didn't really need a blitz, and they were fine. But when he absolutely did need the blitz, when the pass rush was decimated by injuries in 2020 with the 49ers, or when the Jets were talent deficient in 2021, or when they struggled a little bit more at the start of the 2024 season before he got fired as the head coach, the blitz rates were up like near half of like the midway mark of the league. And they were effective blitzes too. And that showed me that this guy can be adaptable. He doesn't just stick with the same thing. And Kyle Shanahan talked a lot about that needed adaptability at the press conference right after they announced that Sorensen wouldn't be coming back as the defensive coordinator. One of the biggest issues with the 49ers last year, they only blitzed 1.7% of the time with 2 or more men. That was the lowest rate in the league. And to give you some perspective, Steve Spagnuolo was bringing such blitzes like 13 or 14% of the time. So like 7x. And I think in this modern league, you have to be able to bring aggressive blitzes. Don't necessarily have to do it a lot like Spagnuolo does, but you have to be able to do it enough to mask issues when those issues inevitably arise. And I remember that game against the Lions, man, they were helpless, the 49ers, over the second half, because even when Sorensen did send a blitz, it was ineffective. So there's a whole art to it that I think Saleh has shown he can deliver on, and we'll see who he builds his staff with if he does come to the 49ers, because all of that's going to be really important as far as evolving schematically with aggressiveness. And I think that's what the 49ers need to fix first. And I think that Saleh brings the experience to be able to do that.
How do you think, and I know you were at the press conference here, and this question was asked at the press conference, do they need to evolve this offense in a certain way? And the reason I ask is, you look at Mike McDonald in Seattle and doing different things, and Brian Flores in Minnesota, and a lot of teams, you go back to a Pete Carroll defense and you say, look, you're going to know what we're going to do, but we're just going to do it better than you. But everything evolves. So do they need to evolve the offense a little bit? I know Kyle, and he said it at the press conference, loves this defense. But do you think Saleh brings a couple of wrinkles, or do they just kind of stick to what they've done and what Kyle has liked in the past?
Well, I think that Kyle specifically said, I like the scheme, but we do need to evolve. And you've seen it and this desire. You've seen this through his hires. Like, he literally went outside the system to bring in Steve Wilkes in 2023. And the hope was that he'd be able to integrate Wilkes into the system. It was kind of like Mike Shanahan in 92. Kyle would bring that up. He said Mike came in to be the 49ers offensive coordinator in 92, even though he didn't have a background with the 49ers. They loved what they were already doing. That was coming off Walsh, going into Seifert. And Seifert told Mike Shanahan, hey, lock yourself in this room and just study our stuff for the whole summer, and then integrate your own things. And that's the idea that they had with Steve Wilkes. That was a tacit admission that they needed new ideas, that they needed to evolve. And I think that when they brought Brandon Staley in 2024, even though he wasn't the DC, that was another tacit admission. And I don't even think it was tacit. I think they literally said it. I have notes here. This is funny. I stumbled on these. It says the Ritz-Carlton on it because it was the Ritz-Carlton in Orlando. This is
Look at you, bro.
I'm sitting there talking. We're talking to John Lynch in a conference room, just a few of us. At the top of this, I have coaching, and it says B. Staley. So Brandon Staley, and I have quotes. I think I asked what the vision with Brandon Staley was. And John Lynch said, we want to play our style of defense, but evolve. That's why we brought Brandon Staley in. So it wasn't tacit. They literally have been saying we need to evolve by bringing in these outside voices. And you put up the graph earlier with Fangio on it. Brandon Staley, Fangio disciple. Now, he's probably not going to stay on the staff next year, but how the 49ers have acted over the past 2 years shows you that there is this need to evolve. What Kyle Shanahan said a couple of weeks ago shows you that same desire to evolve. And I think that Saleh, now that he has stepped away and been a head coach elsewhere and worked with Jeff Ulbrich and worked with different personnel with the Jets, blitzed a little bit more in a couple of those years, he has evolved, and he brings the experience and the knowledge of the existing system that the 49ers need.
David Lombardi is joining us, just does a great job covering the 49ers. And I was looking away because I was going through my 49ers list and making sure we weren't missing anything, because I don't want you to miss anything. And if you go to right now, I'm just looking at a piece that you just wrote at Lombardi himself on Twitter. The 49ers land their big fish in Robert Saleh. Here are the wild twists that made it possible. And that's on the SF Standard right now. So David is a multimedia superstar.
Just to cover myself, I had my editor. I was like, hey, can you add likely to the headline here?
That's what I did last night. I was writing something. I was like, oh, yeah, this isn't done. Likely.
Yeah. So if you refresh it, it's funny because you'll refresh it and you'll see that a new word pops up in the headline. 49ers likely.
Oh, yeah, you're right. Yeah, you did. Very good.
I was like, hey. Wait, we got to be careful with this, right?
Yeah, there you go. Likely. That's tremendous. I got to show this to people. I'm going to screenshot this and put it back on. The other thing that came about yesterday, let's get into this. And again, we're going to give credit too, but we'll put this chart on there as well, you and I, and you've used this before. And I mean, the expected points here are so ridiculous. I want people to understand that. I mean, you're looking at minus 63.8. I mean, that's almost double what the Ravens do. It's just unbelievable. But two things before we get into Brant Boyer. Do you know if there was any conversation with Bones Fossil? Just because Pop and I used to have him on all the time. He's a great guy. He authored this kickoff rule, and he goes to Tennessee. And you look at where the Cowboys were in that thing. They didn't do a lot right this year, but they're at 27 plus 27.3. And Fossil quickly, after McCarthy gets fired there, goes to Tennessee. So I don't know if there was any conversation about Bones Fossil. But Brant Boyer's Jets team, and he's been there since 16, a guy that they're talking to right now, and probably Saleh said, hey, I like this guy. You might want to talk to him. They're still at minus 10.5, which is still light years away from where the 49ers are, and they're 23rd. So it's not Bones Fossil. It's not as bad as the Niners. It's better, certainly. But when you look at that number, do you know if there was any conversation with Bones Fossil?
I don't. There was no official interview with him. Chris Banjo was one of the interviews. He's probably going to end up with the Jets. Jet Modkins was another one of the interviews. Obviously now Brant Boyer was an interview. But I didn't hear anything on that front. I didn't hear anything on the Darren Rizzi front. He's been a good defensive coordinator, was with the Saints before. I'm of the opinion that, and I think that, the data kind of points in this direction. Brian Schneider, before he joined the 49ers, was considered one of the better special teams coordinators in all football. And Kyle Shanahan himself said, you never hear a coach say this after he fires somebody. He said that Brian was the fall guy. So I think that he was acknowledging, yeah, this guy has been a good special teams coordinator.
Right. Just something happened. I don't know.
I mean, the one variable here that's remained constant, and plus, here's more evidence. Richard Hightower, who obviously struggled with the 49ers, they had the number 5 special teams unit with the Bears this past year. So I think this is a top-down thing. And I don't necessarily think it's the 49ers don't pay attention to special teams in terms of roster building, because they clearly do. I mean, they've used a 3rd-round pick on a kicker, a 4th-round pick on a punter. They signed George Odom, who's one of the best special teams players in football. I think it's a mentality thing that almost on a subconscious level permeates special teams. Shanahan in the past has said in as many words, I just hope special teams doesn't lose us the game. Whereas you go back to coaches like Bill Belichick and some of the guys that are really obsessed with special teams, they're looking at it as a chance to gain an advantage and win the game. And I think it's important to speak of special teams in that way, because I think it bleeds down to how the unit ends up performing. And I think that, for the 49ers' sake, hopefully Shanahan realizes this and starts to treat special teams a little bit more seriously on game days. And the most tangible example I could give is 49ers have never run a fake punt, like a designed fake punt under Shanahan.
Wow.
The one time they ran one was Mitch Wishnowsky just improvising, and it got called back because of a hold. So I haven't seen them do anything creative on kick returns. I've never seen them run a fake punt or a fake field goal. I just think that having the willingness to run that, having it in your playbook once a year might completely change how the special teams kind of mentality is going into games. You're trying to seize something instead of just trying to sit back on your heels and prevent something from being taken from you.
Yeah, that's just kind of the way I look at it. And I understand, and people, all season long, the 49ers are using this term, and we were using this term, complementary football. And sometimes I don't think people understand that if you don't have trust in your defense, which Kyle didn't, if you don't have trust in your special teams, you don't have trust in your kicker, like it all comes together so that Kyle can maybe be a little bit more aggressive, whatever the case. And I know he gets a lot of grief for those kind of things, but I'm with you that I think if Saleh comes back and he can trust his defense, if he can get a better special teams guy, I don't know what's going to end up working with Jake Moody. What was he, 31st ranked overall kicker? So can they get his mental side back? But if they can get these things back on track, then I think it'll work from an offensive standpoint where Kyle can actually get it more aggressive and do some certain things. But I know last year he didn't have any trust in special teams. He didn't have any trust in the defense. Therefore, it's hard to play complementary football.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think it's a kind of a shoot for the stars, land on the clouds kind of thing. In that, if you just, instead of right now, they're shooting for the clouds and landing on the ground right. with special teams. They're just saying, hey, we want to be a mid-range special teams unit. Just don't screw it up. Well, that inevitably in a hyper-competitive league is not a good mentality, because you're obviously shooting for the very best on offense and defense. You would never say, oh, I just hope that our offense doesn't lose the game. You never say that about the offense or the defense, but you're actually saying it about special teams. So I really do think that it's hard to put your finger around this, because everybody just wants to point at one coordinator or one kicker. And in this case, yes, the kicker was probably the biggest portion of those expected points that the 49ers lost was on Jake Moody. But you have to realize that he was 13 of 14 before he suffered his injury. He was 11 of 20 after it. And why did he suffer the injury? Because they weren't good on kick coverage, because he got run over by DJ Dallas trying to make a tackle on kick coverage. So it all ended up being tied together, like the ineptitude of one of the coverage units. And I get it, Moody didn't have a great kickoff on that play either, but the ineptitude of the coverage unit led to the injury to the kicker. And then if, in case you didn't notice, the next kicker got hurt the very next week trying to make a tackle. So that problem wasn't fixed. So this is all tied together. And then it just ends in this fiasco where you lose 64 expected points. It was literally the difference between them being a positive point differential and a negative point differential team with special teams. So it has to be addressed.
No doubt. That's another thing. By the way, I just got this, so I want to pop this back up. There is the story right there that you were just talking about, and they did put in that change that likely. So there you go. David Lombardi's piece in the SF Standard. Make sure you check it out. Likely land their big fish, and Robert Saleh here, the wild twist that made it possible. Is there anything there you can? Oops, sorry about that. Is there anything there I want people to go read it, but is there anything you can kind of give us a tease towards in that piece? The wild twists?
Well, I am just, I mean, the whole Liam Coen thing, it's fascinating because that has drawn, for obvious reasons, national level headlines. Might be unprecedented, but this is what I wrote. Coen ghosted his former bosses in Tampa, who'd offered him top-level money to remain offensive coordinator for 26 hours, secretly flew to Jacksonville, and reportedly blamed his disappearance on a sick child. By Thursday night, Coen had agreed to terms with the Jaguars, all while Saleh didn't even make a scheduled trip to Florida for his second-round interview with the team. So that entire process ended up opening up Saleh to the 49ers because there was a period of time, maybe a 24-hour period of time from Wednesday to Thursday, when Saleh was literally the betting favorite to be Jacksonville's head coach. He's obviously not going to be Jacksonville's head coach anymore. And the one thing that changed, which makes it even crazier here, especially from the 49ers perspective, the one variable that changed that Trent Baalke got forced out as Jacksonville's GM, which seems to have obviously been a prerequisite for Liam Coen to change his tune. He leaves Jacksonville saying he's out of consideration. The Jags finally realize, oh, maybe we shouldn't have this guy who keeps on surviving head coaches around, because Ben Johnson didn't want him there and Glenn didn't want him there and Liam Coen probably didn't want him there. So they get rid of Baalke, the former 49ers GM, and they replace him with Ethan Waugh, who was a member of the 49ers scouting department for almost 2 decades. He bridged the Baalke and the Lynch eras. And Ethan Waugh probably deserves a lot of credit as the interim GM for bringing Liam Coen back to the table. And so it's all this is a national story, unprecedented stuff, but characters who used to be in the 49ers building are playing major roles in it to, at the end of the day, clear the path for Robert Saleh to potentially come back to the 49ers. So I kind of wrote about all of that. Very
cool. Make sure you check that out in the SF Standard. He always writes great pieces, does David Lombardi. In terms of a timing standpoint, because you put the word likely in there, like you said, really New Orleans is the only one. Dallas, I know Jerry Jones a little bit. I think he's going to go to the offensive side. I've been saying Kellen Moore the whole time. Maybe it's going to be Schottenheimer, but it looks like it's going to happen. Do you have any sense of timing here of when Robert Saleh could officially become the Niners defensive coordinator?
Yeah, and then obviously the Saints, and I mean, there's still head coaching openings technically there, although the Raiders and Jacksonville, those are closed with Pete Carroll and Liam Coen respectively. I figured, last night there was a ton of momentum. I think what Mike Silver had said, I think it's going to be happening soon. Yeah. It seemed that maybe Saleh would just, an announcement would come soon today. But then there was a little bit of a backing off. I think Matt Mayoko said, he said he's going to be defensive coordinator of the 49ers if he's defensive coordinator, but that he can't be head coach somewhere else. So it just depends on if Saleh wants to wait this out and see if something pops up head coaching wise. It appears that he's got a handshake deal with the 49ers right now, but like Liam Coen, he hasn't actually signed on the dotted line. So then it's just going to be a matter of when does he want to sign on the dotted line? And if he just wants this all to be over, and I'm sure from his family's perspective that they want to know where they're going to be at some point, there's a deadline there too. He could sign now and it all will be over. But if there are some other faint opportunities, sometimes guys just like to interview for the sake of interviewing. You're networking Absolutely. For the future, right? Yep. So, and that's his right. The Jets gave him that right when they fired him in week 5 of this season. So all power to Robert Saleh there. But I do know that if this drags out a little bit longer, then we're going to see that anxiety creep back into the 49ers fan base. That's good. That's for sure.
There's no doubt about it. Again, this looks like 99%, 99.9%. Were in your mind, were there any backup plans, or what was the backup plan? I mean, Pete Carroll's name was thrown out there. What did you think? If it wasn't going to be Saleh, just for the heck of it, what did you think?
I think Brandon Staley is a lot better coach than people give him credit for. Mm-hmm. And he's already been in the building for a year. So I think, when we talk about why Steve Wilkes failed, they were trying to take somebody who was running something totally different, and it was like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. I think they've been happy with Staley working with the DBs this past year. And I think that a lot of that went well for the 49ers. specifically the part that he was running. So they interviewed him. They gave him that interview. They wouldn't have given him the interview if they were terribly displeased with how he coached. He had the number one defense in football the one year he was a coordinator in 2020. I don't pretend to look at his head coaching resume, which wasn't good, and act like that's how he's going to do as a coordinator. Those are two very different jobs. So I think that Staley was that backup plan for the 49ers. But if they're going to go in a different direction, if it's Robert Saleh, then it makes sense that he wouldn't remain on the staff, because this is a guy who has succeeded as a coordinator in the past before. I mean, it would be a coup for the 49ers if they could land Saleh and somehow keep Staley around, but I would get it if he left, given that, just the same way that I get Nick Sorensen leaving. You demote it at the very best from defensive coordinator, so why would you want to stick around the staff? But they interviewed @𝐿𝐮𝐬𝐜𝐿𝐿 Townsend from the Lions. He's a DB coach. That never seemed to be something that they would pursue as far as a hire, because it didn't seem that Kyle Shanahan wanted a first-time coordinator again. He talked about experience, and he might have been able to pick up some ideas from @𝐿𝐮𝐬𝐜𝐿𝐿 Townsend. And a lot of times the interview process is a sharing of ideas back and forth, and you give a guy some exposure for the first time. So I always thought that the @𝐿𝐮𝐬𝐜𝐿𝐿 Townsend situation was more of that for the 49ers. And that left Brandon Staley and Robert Saleh as the two candidates who appeared to have a legitimate shot. And I think that Pete Carroll's name started to be floated around after the twists in Jacksonville, right? When Liam Coen said no thanks to Jacksonville and went back to Tampa, 49ers might have started sweating. And then they're like, oh, okay, well, what do we do now? And that's when Pete Carroll's name came up. But obviously now it seems that things are back on a more orderly trajectory.
The only thing about Staley that I had heard from some former players that maybe he wasn't as liked, and there was maybe a little bit of arrogance there. And then when I looked at his number, like 2020 with the Rams, people don't understand. I mean, they were number one in yards, number one in points. They had one touchdown against, these numbers, 12 interceptions. It was incredible. And then he just couldn't turn that over to the Chargers, went 24-24. And I don't care that he was going for it on fourth down. I don't care that he was a bad head coach or whatever people want to say. Great coordinators can be bad head coaches. It doesn't mean, like, Liam Coen is not automatic. Ben Johnson is not automatic. Because you're a great coordinator doesn't mean you're going to be a great head coach. So, I don't know what it's going to translate to, but I know that, like I said, there was a lot of people in the building that did like him. Let me flip two more quick things for you out here, and I'm trying to keep monitoring on things to make sure that we're not missing anything, because I know you got a lot of things to do on all this stuff. But you asked the question during the press conference about the offensive coordinator gig. And of course, you got to still go through the Rooney Rule and do all those kind of things. Do you know where they are as far as looking for an OC for Kyle? Will they have one?
They will. I think that the heavy favorite is 𝐾𝐨𝐿𝐵𝐿, because they wanted. And
you asked that question, I remember. In the press
conference. And Kyle just kind of served up some news to me there. I was shocked, actually. I had to go back and replay it. And I'm like, did Kyle just casually announce that he's
the OC? Right.
Yeah. Kyle works in funny ways sometimes, Kyle walked by in the locker room and, just you have a quick word with him. It's kind of funny. It's a little quirky, but I've enjoyed it over the years. But this happened in a press conference, and it's like, oh, wait, he's going to promote 𝐾𝐨𝐵𝐿𝐿. And Kyle, he said it. But then he said it wasn't that big of a deal, but he wouldn't have said it if it wasn't that big of a deal. I think there was a little bit of both forces going on here. I think Kyle's going to remain the play caller. He should remain the play caller. We've seen around the league why that's so valuable, because these defensive coaches, and you look at, or coaches who don't call plays. So you look at Todd Bowles in Tampa or Dan Campbell in Detroit. These are coaches who don't call plays. They're in huge trouble when their offensive play caller leaves. Liam Coen goes to Jacksonville. Ben Johnson goes to Chicago. Oh, God, now what are the Bucks and what are the Lions going to do, right? So you're insulated against chaos to some extent by having a head coach who can call plays. That's really important for the 49ers. But you're also much better positioned for success, and this was not a good year for Kyle Shanahan play calling for numerous reasons. Mm-hmm. I think you're much more insulated when you've got a trusted voice in that offensive meeting room with the head coach who can check the head coach, but not just check the head coach, also be a bigger picture set of eyes, right? That he could see if you're starting to go too far down a rabbit hole. And I think that 𝐾𝐨𝐵𝐿𝐿's ascension to that offensive coordinator title, even though if it's not official yet, the fact that Kyle Shanahan wants to promote him to that title means he's developing the trust to be the guy that Mike McDaniel was. McDaniel, the only other OC in title under Kyle Shanahan back in 2021. And that was a really good offense in 2021, even though they were really struggling with injuries along the offensive line. So I think that's really important because you want that healthy exchange of ideas and that healthy pushback within the offensive coaching room. And I think that it's a sign that it could be there because he's willing to give a guy a front-facing offensive coordinator role.
David, I'm so glad you brought that up because I was pounding the table before you asked that question, and I was so intrigued by it because I was saying on the show, like, you need a defensive coordinator, you need a special teams coordinator, but I said one of the things that you saw week in and week out was I want somebody who Kyle can trust, which is the key. Kyle can trust, bounce things off of. I mentioned the same thing that you just did, a Mike McDaniel type, where especially in the red zone, I know you're missing Christian McCaffrey and all these other guys, but are you becoming too predictable? Like all these different things that if Kyle can trust a guy, what McDaniel brought, and I thought they were missing that offensively. So when you asked that question and he said 𝐬𝐽, and then you had to go through the Rooney Rule, and I had heard Clay was talking to the Seahawks and different guys, so I don't know where that stands right now, but because Kyle's not going to just trust anybody. I don't think Kyle's just going to bring somebody from the outside and say, okay, I trust you. It's going to take a minute, like it did McDaniel, he knew, like it does 𝐬𝐽, he knows. So I hope that's the case because while we've all focused on DC and special teams, and I get it, I really do think that Kyle needs somebody that like that back in the building, not as you said to call plays, but just somebody who's in the room where he might say, hey, Kyle, what about this? And I think that might have been missing.
I think it was definitely missing down the stretch of the game against Detroit where they passed the ball 16 straight times. I mean, that was a great example of, great game plan. They completely exposed Detroit's defense for most of that game with a balanced attack. They're running, they're passing. Obviously, like the pass game was how they're going to most hurt the Lions, but this is the NFL. And if you get too pass happy, they're going to tee off on you. They're not going to respect any of your play fakes. The safeties are going to be reading the quarterback's eyes, and eventually the quarterback is going to start throwing picks if you're passing every single down. I don't care if it's Tom Brady, Joe Montana, Brock Purdy, whoever it was. And his second pick came on a 10th straight passing play. And to me, that was just a loss of oversight. That was the 49ers, calling plays. And Kyle's like, this is working. This is great. But the whole time, Kirby Joseph on the back end of that Detroit defense starts licking his chops. He's like, they're passing every down. And on that second interception, there was a play action. And he did not even budge on the fake. He was like, this is a pass the whole way. And it was a pick, and the 49ers lost control of that game. And if you have a healthy back and forth on the sideline or up to the booth on your communication system, say, hey, Kyle, we're getting a little too far into this passing rabbit hole. We got to keep them honest. You can do that when you have a Mike McDaniel, when you have somebody who is able to – it doesn't have as much power as Shanahan, but has that voice and can have the confidence to step up and say, hey, we need to change course here a little bit. And I think that's really important for any offensive staff.
Great stuff, man. Real quick, I know I said I wouldn't keep you long and I could talk to you all day, but real quick, Brock Purdy, it's not that it's going to get done. It's going to get done. But is it going to get done quickly? What do you think?
I'm not sure. That might depend on the 49ers here and how quickly, there's so many dynamics. We don't even know what the salary cap is exactly yet. So that's going to come out at some point in February. I would think they were so awash in salary cap space back in 2018 when they re-signed Jimmy Garoppolo to the highest deal ever at the time that they got that done in early February. They didn't even need to know what the cap was. That was the infancy of building these version of the 49ers. So it wasn't a concern at that time. Now every dollar is a concern. So they're, I think, at least going to have to know what the cap is going to be, which is based on NFL revenue, so they could properly structure this thing. Beyond that, I personally don't think that this is that complicated. I think that the market is the market. And also, a lot of this is just an ego match because the APY is not going to be what functionally changes life for either Purdy or the 49ers, right? It's going to be the guaranteed money and the structure, which that's what you need to know the salary cap for. But we've gotten our APY answer through the fact that there are a lot of quarterbacks who are less accomplished than Brock Purdy in the 50s, including, and that doesn't include Dak Prescott, who was less accomplished than Brock Purdy, who's at 60. So if this is just a vanity kind of thing for both sides, like for the agent and for Brock Purdy and obviously for the 49ers not wanting to look like they lost the negotiation, 49ers might as well just drop that at this point, because they can work with a 61 million number just as well as they can work with a 55 million number by the way that they structure this. And precedent tells us, looking at especially at the failures of a lot of these quarterbacks in the playoffs, precedent tells us with a growing salary cap and this contract having to take a certain percentage of it, that 60-61 is on the table. So I think it just is a matter of how quickly both sides kind of realize that. But every single negotiation, John, in the history of negotiations always ends up being a little bit more, I think, about the ego and about the surface level numbers than it does about the nuts and bolts. So there's always going to be that component. So the question is, how quickly do they get that component out the door and focus on the real nuts and bolts?
And real quick, just because you already did a great job with this and you're tremendous with the contracts, people have to make sure that you're following David on social media. His YouTube channel is absolutely must watch, must listen. But you already did a breakdown that I think I popped it up on the screen the other day on my show. But I'm just roughly speaking here. Maybe the first year's 15 on a cap hit, then 23, then like 28, 29, and then boom, it hits into 74. But I think you did such a tremendous job with it. But I think what people have to understand and remember is Jimmy Garoppolo back in like 18 made $25 million and was the highest. And then Derek Carr got it. We've doubled since that point, doubled plus. And so by the time you get to maybe that fourth year that you laid out, you look at 74 and people want to vomit or choke, but it's like, that's going to be the going rate. I mean, that's just what it's going to be.
And his cap hit wouldn't be 74 that year, because by the time you hit that fourth year, it's non-guaranteed base,
right, that
you can convert into signing bonus, and you surf a wave. And what people need to understand is the cap is rising. So it's totally sustainable to move money into the future. People act like the bill's going to come due at some point. A bill only comes due if you unsustainably push money into the future. But if the 49ers have been doing this for 8 years now, and they're projecting where the cap is going to be based on the rate of cap inflation that there's been, and they're moving that money into the future in a way that still fits under the lid of the rising salary cap. So it's like there's no penalty for doing this. All you do is restructure the deal. So it's like taking out a 0 interest loan. It's not like they're paying interest on this money that they're pushing into the future. So I compare it, John, to the salary cap is a bunch of sinks filling with water. Every year is its own sink, and you can't let the water flow over the tip of the sink in any given year. So your expenditures are coming through the faucet, and then your restructures are leaving through a drain that leads to a pipe that pushes the water and pours into faucets of future years. So you're constantly exercising flow control. You're trying to manage how high the water level is in every subsequent season. So far, the 49ers have kept the level of the sink under the top of the sink and in all these years, and I think they can continue doing that by playing the same game with Brock Purdy.
Bro, there's a reason that David Lombardi went to Stanford, man. I've never heard that put that way. That was tremendous. Even my small brain went, oh, yeah, I get it. That's awesome, man. Dude, you do such a good job, man. There it is right there. Make sure that you're checking out David Lombardi. You probably already are, but make sure you are. Social media at David Lombardi on right here on YouTube. You do such a great job, man. And thank you. I know everybody's busy this time of year. Things are going crazy. Solid news at any time. And so thank you for taking the time, man. It's great to see you. I'm excited to be on here. I'm having a great time with it. But guys like you really make it worth the while to really get knowledgeable and to give everybody a bunch of knowledge. So thank you, man.
I just want to know when you're coming on to my channel. I'm looking forward to that.
Anytime, dude. This is so much fun, and it's been just so illuminating for me, and to just have so much fun with this whole thing has been awesome. So thank you as always. You make us smarter when we talk to you, and I know I'll see you soon, and I'll be back down there. But thank you so much for your time and insight, bro. We'll talk to you real soon.
Thanks, John. We'll talk to you soon.
Man. You got it.